So, as Darren said, my name is Jakir Hussain, and today I'm going to be talking about my findings in my research towards the methodologies behind replayability in games. The purpose of the study was to essentially discover whether or not replayability of games could be measured in any particular way, and exactly what parameters of replayability there are, and how exactly they contribute or are a detriment to replayability. Now, I've already said the word replayability a few times now, but exactly what is replayability? Before we can even define that, we need to first talk about what playability is. And that is the binary measurement of whether a game is or is not enjoyable to a player. So, true or false, 0 or 1. Replayability is the quantitative measurement of how playable a game is. So, the total summation of your measurements of playability of a game. Now, as an example, a player sits down to play a single game. That is their declaration of saying, this is a playable game to me. Every time they sit down to play that game, they are making that declaration over and over again. And adding up those measurements is the game's replayability for that particular player. Now that I've gone over replayability, I can now go into my 3 major parameters of replayability. The first being probability space. Now, after quite a bit of research, I've realized that the best way I can describe probability space is by putting together this diagram here. The black border, the perimeter around this shape is containing the entire probability space of the game. And probability space is the total number of possible significant states that a game can be in. So think the Walking Dead Telltale series. Every single key point in the story where there is a pivotal narrative choice, where you can make one choice or the other to affect the outcome of the story, is a point within the game's probability space. Depending on the certain start conditions of the game, you may have your trajectory aimed either up or down within the depth of the game's probability space. And this red dotted line you see here is the single experience that the player has experienced in that one particular session of playing. So this red dotted line here and the 90-degree angle you see here is a point in the player's experience where they made a pivotal choice that drastically changed what was the rest of what they were going to experience in the game. So in Mass Effect, you're choosing Paragon in every single option, you're being the law-abiding citizen, and suddenly a character backstabs you. You decide to go renegade for life. And so there's a massive change in what you're going to experience next. Onto my second parameter, player loyalty. This is a bit interesting because the research actually started from studies in gambling, but the same logic can be applied to replayability in games. Under player loyalty, we have this idea of the affectance motive, which is the desire to achieve an outcome in a particular environment. And this also has overlaps with psychology, where there's this understanding of every human being having a common need to have some kind of level of control over whatever they're doing. And this applies to games as well. Control can be identified as one of 2 things: primary or secondary control. Primary control is being able to directly manipulate one's environment. So in the context of a game, it would be something like moving boxes, opening doors, but more importantly, having significant effects on the characters around you, the story that's taking place, and other key factors in the game. Secondary control would be something like leveling up your character, changing something about your character to then be able to achieve a different kind of change within the game. A good example of this would be playing a multiplayer match of Call of Duty. You want to make a particular change, being able to take over a particular player, but you're unable to do that. So when you respawn, you've changed your loadout, you've changed something about your character to then be able to accomplish a change in your environment. And this helps in players pursuing their effectiveness motive. And by being able to have a certain level of control over their environment, the player will then be able to better manipulate the trajectory they take on within the game's probability space. For my third and final parameter of replayability, we have the player engagement cycle. The player engagement cycle was first introduced to the world by Henrik Schnofog, and his research breaks down into this simple diagram here. Starting from objectives, moving on to activities, accomplishments, and effects. With objectives, there can be one of two types, either intrinsic or extrinsic objectives. So, in layman's terms, the game told you to do something, or you told yourself that you were going to achieve something within the game. So, in a game of FIFA, the game is telling you to score a goal. That's one of the most fundamental goals of the game. But your own intrinsic objective could be to score as many tricks as you can as you go up to score a goal. There's no system in the game of giving you 0.2 goals for every trick that you perform before scoring a goal, or a combo meter or anything like that. It's simply a system that the player can use to express their own control and pursue their own intrinsic objectives. Do something that they want to do that the game doesn't reward them for. Activities is extremely vague because games can offer such a wide variety of activities. But when it comes to replayability, so long as the activities allow the player to express primary or secondary control in any significant way that allows them to pursue their effectiveness motive and explore all of the probability space that is available within the game, the activities within that game are promoting its replayability. As the player takes on those activities to complete their objectives, they've made an accomplishment. And those accomplishments, again, can either be intrinsic or extrinsic. Something the game gave them, such as sweet, sweet loot, or progression in the story or levels, or just the mere satisfaction of being able to get all the collectibles, speak to all NPCs, collect every weapon. Either making an accomplishment or just simply taking part in activities, players will experience one of three types of effects. Either positive, like victory, negative, failure, or the third being immersion. And this is simply the absorbing effect players experience when they take part in the activities that a game presents them. The only detriment to replayability out of those three effects is the negative experience. But this negative experience can be overcome by just simply what the game provides in terms of activities. So in a game like Dark Souls, players are met with constant defeat. They are dying at every single boss, every single enemy they come across. But the satisfaction that the players already experienced from victory is enough to keep them absorbed in their experience. It's enough of an effectiveness motive to overcome their negative experiences and keep driving forward to make that accomplishment for their objective and move on to their next objective. And so goes the player continuation cycle, the player engagement cycle. So I've got these three parameters of replayability. They all make a lot of sense and they all have a lot of overlaps with each other. So what do I do with that information with my project? Well, I've made a theoretical framework of replayability, which combines as many of the theories that I possibly could into one simple diagram. Now, there's a lot of text there. I'm not going to read through it. But what this theoretical framework achieves is by combining all of these aspects of replayability, you can then use this image and the things it describes to help you assess how replayable a game is by simply just following what it describes. It breaks down ideas of replayability into its concept, its design, and its gameplay sequence. And as you can see here, this gameplay sequence takes heavily from the player engagement cycle: objectives, activities, accomplishments, and effects. Now, I didn't just use this framework to assess the replayability of games. For my final year project, I also used this to help me in developing my own replayable game. My own game that should theoretically be highly replayable if I were to be following what was described in this framework. It's scientific research. This should be legit. But obviously with any test I had to have a control version of the game as well. So a version of the game that had aspects of replayability removed from it. And I chose these particular aspects of the game. The game itself was a top-down twin-stick stealth game, heavily inspired by the Metal Gear franchise. And it was a standalone EXE made in Unity. I had a web server hosted on the university's servers, and I handed out 50 copies of the game to 50 different willing test participants. 25 of them being the replayable version of the game, with all 5 of these features included, and the second version being the exact same game, but having these 5 features removed. Now, what do these 5 features do for the game? Well, with the example of unlockable abilities, by allowing the player to unlock abilities, they are then able to tap into their secondary control, express more secondary control, by being able to change something about themselves to then better change something in the game environment. And as I said before, being able to express primary or secondary control allows players to pursue their effective motive better and explore more of the game's probability space. High score tables. This taps into ideas of competitiveness, competing against other players. Achievements, the satisfaction of unlocking every single achievement in the game, giving players an option to pursue intrinsic objectives. And randomized object positions. By randomizing different aspects of the game, there's more unpredictability in the game, and so a wider, larger probability space in the game. More things to experience. Now, I've given out these 50 copies of the game to 50 willing test participants, and on the university server side, I was collecting information about what the players were doing. I've collected huge amounts of data, but thankfully, I'm not going to show you 15 different graphs. I'm only going to show you one. And that one single graph speaks for itself, really. And that's this here. This is a box plot, and it compares the number of times players have logged in, so actually signed in to play the game, on the replayable group side and the non-replayable group. And as you can see here, there's a bit of an overlap with my minimum values, my lower quartiles, and my mediums here. So that's probably why you can't see the middle line here. But the replayable group is still hugely positively skewed compared to the non-replayable group. On average, people that were given the non-replayable version of the game, the version of the game that was only missing 5 features, only sat down to play the game about 1 or 2 times. The exact same game with those 5 features added, players were sitting down to play the game about 1 to 5 times. One guy sat down to play the game 13 times. He loved it. It was great. But so what? I've got these numbers. Some people like my game. What does that have to do with my project? As I said at the beginning, if you only remember, replayability is the quantitative measurement of how playable a game is. And as I've said, playability is the binary measurement of whether or not a game is enjoyable to a player. So how many times a player has sat down to play a particular game. And that is exactly what I've measured here. Every single other graph I've produced, that I'm not showing here, has had this massive difference between the replayable group and the non-replayable group. In every single test I've conducted, it has been extremely one-sided for the replayable group. Now, you could say that within the confines of my research, I have been able to successfully measure replayability. And I have found actual working parameters of replayability that can be used in a theoretical framework that can be used to both assess a game's replayability and help you develop a game with replayability in mind. So I achieved the purpose of my study. And hopefully I achieved the purpose of this presentation as well, which is to share this information, and hopefully you guys got to take something from this presentation and be able to make your games just that much more replayable. Are there any questions? At the front here?
So when you talk about the unlockable abilities,
Yep.
in the version of the game that didn't have unlockable abilities,
Yep.
were they already present or were they removed from the game
They
entirely?
were removed from the game entirely.
Okay, just the second question. So when you're dealing with different sets of people, did you standardize for their normal habits in any way, or was it just you did enough studies with a large enough number of people?
Yeah, it was more quantity over quality, because I couldn't really control for factors such as a person's particular game type preference. One of the weaknesses, one of the limitations of my study was that this was a top-down twin-stick stealth game. Not a lot of people would particularly enjoy sitting down constantly to replay a top-down twin-stick stealth game. Also, because a good portion of my test participants were students, and I was conducting this test in crunch time when everyone was busy working on their coursework, not too many people would be keen to sit down to play a game. Regardless though, 25 people in both groups with such a massive difference in results is still quite promising. Darren?
Have you got any footage of the game?
Have I got any footage of the game? Let's see if we're lucky here. I do. Where is File Explorer? There she is.
That's it.
Transcend. There we go. Log video. So this was a video that I presented in a previous log. I was only a guest speaker there, so I only had about 5 minutes, so I put together a video that quickly summed everything. I'm just going to mute this because things are happening. But this was during a time when I was still in the testing stage of my game, and I was rounding up people to be willing participants in my game. So as you can see, made in the Unity engine, these are some of the unlockable abilities that players can unlock in the replayable version of the game. So dropping smoke bombs at the player's current position to block enemy field of view so that they be able to make a quick escape, and being able to throw rocks straight in front of the player so that they can cause some noise and distract enemies from their patrol route so that they may be able to go off their patrol and the player can take advantage of a new opening. Yeah, collectibles down the corner as well. Collectibles are removed from the replayable version of the game, and those collectibles had their positions randomized as well. So every single time a player came in to replay the same level, even though the enemy's placements were the same and those security cameras had the same placement, the collectibles themselves had randomized positions. And so there was still always something just slightly new about the experience to find within the level. And that was a key difference between the replayable and non-replayable versions of the game. Any other questions? Yourself?
How did you arrive at this framework? Did you was it an iterative process, or did you try a bunch of radically different approaches?
It was more of a eureka moment. At the beginning of even thinking about this project, I had this idea of putting together a framework of replayability to then test. And it was with that goal in mind that I was doing my research and thinking, well, how does this overlap with other things that I've found, other studies that I've found? So I picked the 3 top studies that related to replayability that had the most overlaps with each other that I could then combine into the framework of replayability. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you.
Did you, I mean, you've got 5 parameters there. Did you try any kind of versions where you just had, you know, say one of the parameters or 2 of them to see if, you know, there was any weighting towards one thing that made it more replayable than the others?
Well,
See what I mean?
yeah, well, it could be argued that, probability space, player loyalty, and the player engagement cycle, because they have so many overlaps with each other, they kind of say the same thing again and again, just in different ways and specifying different things. So the fact that they do have so many overlaps just pushes the message forward more that particular aspects of the game can make them significantly more replayable. But yeah, it would be much better for my research if I were to have different versions of that framework and test those specifically to then see how they weigh up against each other and if there's any similarities that should be combined. A question over here?
Thomas, have you found any correlation between session length and number of sessions the player used to play the game?
Well, in my database, I was collecting information of relating to time, but that was mostly related to how long a player would take to finish the level, because score was dependent on how quickly you finish the level. But that is interesting because that goes into ideas of retaining player engagement. And retaining a player's engagement would mean that they are continuing to play more levels, they are sticking with the player engagement cycle. In terms of how long players are sitting down to play, that wasn't a main factor in my research. And I should probably write that down somewhere.
So what you passed now, you don't need to.
But, over here?
Are you planning on continuing to do more research?
Definitely. I'm only 21 now, but this exact topic is something I'm really keen on doing for my PhD in about 10 years' time. Once I've established my career a bit more, gotten a bit more experience in development, and have more means to be able to gather up a larger sample size. I mean, most final year projects and for undergraduate degrees have sample sizes of about 10 or 20 people, and I went for 50. But something like replayability, basically game design of the project needs a much bigger sample size than that, and much more time and research put into it to do it justice.
Okay, hi folks, yep, I'm Colm and Julia, we're from the British Film Institute. So we're here to talk about the UK video games tax relief. So just to get an idea, who in the room is aware of the games tax relief? And has anyone actually applied? No? Thank you, sir. Yeah, so we just wanted to give a broad rundown of what they are, why they might be relevant to you, regardless of what your position within the industry is, whether it's something you're doing in your spare time, something you've already started a company or working on, or whether you're just moving out of university and maybe going into development. It's essentially relevant to all of those areas, and it's not immediately apparent that it would be. So we're going to run through it without sort of getting too bogged down in details. Then hopefully there'll be some time for questions at the end where you can ask, specifically how it might relate to you. The certain qualifying criteria. Essentially, the scheme itself is about the British government is able to provide tax relief to people making video games in the UK, and there are a few criteria that you have to hit to sort of get across the first step. So one of them is that the relief needs to be paid to a company. It can't be paid to an individual or a sole trader because it's money that's coming from the government. So you need to have a UK games development company set up within the UK corporation tax net before you move into full development of the project. So you can play around and prototype and stuff, but when you first start developing what will become the final product, you need to have a company set up that money is moving through, who's responsible for making decisions. You also need to spend a minimum of 25% of your core expenditure in the UK or in the European Economic Area. Core expenditure relates to expenses that are directly involved in developing the game, so programming, design, audio, art, and not things like legal or marketing or accounting costs. Video game has to be intended for supply, and that's just a general term that means people need to be able to play it. It needs to be publicly available. So like installations that are in museums are fine because you can go to the museum and play it. Things that are walled off behind, necessarily membership or only run at, retreats in the mountains somewhere, or you can't claim the relief on those. And then the thing that we're mainly here to talk about is that it has to qualify as British through the cultural test, which is what the British Film Institute is actually responsible for. We work on behalf of government to apply the cultural test. The reason it's necessary is that for a government to give tax relief to a particular creative industry is considered state aid, and within the European Union, state aid is illegal, so you need to have a special exception from the European Commission, and one of the requirements of that is that you have to demonstrate that the games that are being produced are culturally of the country that's producing them, that wouldn't necessarily be made if they didn't have access to the reliefs. But the cultural test itself, which Julia will take you through in a little bit, is it's very, very broad, and it's not a check. It's not an ideological or political check on the content of the game. It's much broader and more accessible than that. So, I mean, one of the most important questions is then what the relief is actually worth. So, all things in, it can be worth about 20% of what you spend making the game, and you claim it's only claimable on money that you've spent rather than being claimable in advance. So at the end of your tax year, whatever money has gone into the development, you can get 20% of that back as a payable credit from the Treasury when you do your taxes at the end of the year. The way it's worked out is a little bit more complicated than that. It's actually 25% of the core costs, but the amount that you can claim on is capped at 80%. So it's a quarter of 80%, which is 20. But there's an example up there. When you're, I forgot what I was going to say. Sorry. But I'll pass it over to Julia to take you through what the requirements are for the cultural test to actually access the relief. Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so it's a 31-point test, but you only have to get 16 points to pass. And so one thing to remember when you actually come around to actually filling in it is if you think you've reached 16 points, then stop there. Don't bother filling in the rest, it's a waste of your time. So there are 4 different sections. Section A, which is cultural content. That is basically where the game is set, what the nationality of the characters is, what the subject matter is. So that's essentially, if the characters are British and it's set in the UK, then it's a British subject matter. This also includes European content, and also includes something called undetermined location, which I think is on the next slide, isn't it? Yeah, okay, so I'll go to that here. So undetermined location, basically, if your game is set in a completely fantasy world or a completely generic world, you can still get points for that, even though it's not obviously British or European. So obviously there's a lot of video games that are set in fantasy locations, things like that, space, you can get points for that as well. The subject matter, so like I said, if it's set in the UK and the characters are British, you can get points for that. But if a British European person has come up with the concept for the game or has done the game design document, you can also get points for them having done that. So one analogy to use is if, say, you had a film script and it was set in America, but the writer was British, you would get points for that. So it's basically the same as that. Then you also get points in Section A for the language of the game. If it's in English or it's in a British minority language, then you can get points there. And that's not just for, say you have a game that doesn't have dialogue, if your menu is in English, you can get points for that. So that's Section A, that's the cultural content, and it's possible to pass in that section alone. So if you have a game that's set in the UK, British characters, British subject matter, English language, you can pass in that section, and it's really simple, straightforward. If you don't pass in that section, there's Section B, which is cultural contribution. That's where you can get points for things like creativity. So if there's something particularly unique about your game, either in terms of the genre or some kind of technological innovation, you can get a point there. There's British heritage. So if your game is based on a British historical event or an actual British historical person, then you get points there. And then also diversity, which is where if there's an on-screen or off-screen representation of an underrepresented group, then you get points there. The next two sections, which is section C and section D, that's cultural hubs and cultural practitioners, that's basically just a fancy way of saying where the game is made and who's making it. So if you're doing certain types of work, such as programming, design, concept in the UK, you can get points for that being done here, and that's kind of calculated on an expenditure basis. You can also get points for who's made the game, and there is a list of sort of key roles, and you can get points for those people being either British or European. There's an extra requirement there, so if you did need points for where it's being made or who's made it, there's something called an accounts report, which is basically where someone verifies that they've done that. But there's a bunch of different sort of supporting documents that are required when you're applying, but yeah. So how to apply? That's the test itself, so that's how you pass. And I definitely recommend, if you think it may be relevant to you, looking at our website, there's guidance notes there, give some examples and stuff like that. But how to actually apply? It's an online form. There's a 4 to 6 week turnaround time, but that turnaround time includes you applying to us coming with any feedback, and then ultimately you getting a certificate if you pass. And it's not like it's a yes or no kind of application process. Within that 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to be coming back to you with any questions, offering suggestions how you might pass, sort of in a way that's simpler for you, and sort of making it as easy for you as possible. There are 2 different kinds of certificate. There's something called an interim certificate and a final certificate. An interim certificate, as it says there, is for games that are still in development. So you can actually get a certificate whilst your game is still being made, and can make claim on expenditure you've already done to continue funding making your game. And then there's a final certificate for completed games. You don't have to apply for an interim certificate, but you have to apply for a final certificate if you apply for an interim certificate. With games that are kind of games as a service, or where you know that you're going to be adding content to it for a long time, you can apply for an interim or a final. If you think you're kind of in that circumstance, just get in touch with us and we can advise what may be the best sort of avenue to go around, because there are some kind of implications there in terms of your actual claim to HMRC and the way we would assess the game. Like it says there, the guidance notes are the best place to start. They might answer sort of the initial questions that you have. Like I said at the beginning, you only need 16 points. There's no kind of sliding scale of tax relief. If you get more points, if you get 16 points, if you think you've got 16 points, you pass. Don't apply for any more. There are supporting documents required. For an interim application, we need a budget, so that's what you've spent so far, what you think you're going to spend to finish the game. Or for a final application, we require a final cost report. That will be what you've actually spent on the game. We want some kind of development schedule. So basically what we're looking for is a start date and a completion date, and also any relevant sections in between. We want either, for a final application, we would want a copy of the game to assess, or to kind of stand in for that interim so that we can kind of assess where the game's set, who the characters are, if there are characters. Then we want a game design document or screenshots, concept art, that sort of thing. For the underlying material that I mentioned earlier, so if the person that came up with the concept is British or European, we do require some kind of proof for that. So you might have some kind of contract which names someone as being, say, a script writer or the designer for it. We accept something like that. Or we do have a sworn statement template, which is basically where you just take this document to a solicitor, sign some bits, and that's proof that that's basically a statement that the person that you're saying has done the concept of the game, did do the concept of the game, and that they're British European. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're applying for section C and D, which is where the game is made and who's making it, we do require something called an accounts report, and that's basically where an auditor verifies the money you're saying you spent on, say, programming, you did spend on programming, and you spent that in the UK, or they're basically saying, yes, this person worked on the game, and yes, they are British. Once you've done the online application form, you submit that, you then have to print off a hard copy and print off something called a statutory declaration. You then take that to a solicitor and basically sign that saying everything in the application is true. it's a legal requirement because obviously, ultimately, you might end up with a certificate which entitles you to pay money. So it's a legal requirement, and then you send that to us, and that's the point at which we start assessing the game. But the whole process itself is free. We don't charge anything. But the statute declaration is going to cost you some money. The price of going to a solicitor. If you need account support, that's going to cost you money. But otherwise, it's absolutely free other than the price of a few stamps. So it's definitely worth doing. It's essentially free money. If you can pass the test, you absolutely should do it.
So yeah, just before we go on to questions, I wanted to point out from earlier. So there's a lot of information. It's a lot of paperwork. So the idea is that you would want to look at potential money you can claim back actually being worth going through these hoops. And if you're doing this as something that's in your spare time, one of the key things to take away can be that there are ways of structuring what you're doing in your spare time, like having a company set up, like funding it using the salary that you make during the day. That if you take a couple of those structural steps, you're able to make the money that you're essentially using to develop games that you're working on go a little further. And it's definitely worth talking to HMRC about that. Yeah, I know it's a lot of info. So if anybody has any questions now, please.
So I mean, what you just pointed out, like there's going to be guys here who like graduating,
Yes.
just graduates, small indie people, and every kind of penny matters.
Yeah.
So something like this would actually make a bigger difference to people like them, at some level, whereas kind of bigger companies, I mean, I'm not going to say all big companies are going to be tax avoiders, but like they'll kind of say, oh, that's easy, just give us our systems to do. They'll just do it, we don't have to worry about it, they'll be paid anyway. So wouldn't it be kind of a good idea to try and have stuff like this for a small indie company where it's like going to be one guy, perhaps, who probably pass all the tests fairly easily, but has to like get some sworn thing saying, yeah, this guy definitely works on it.
So we've had a number of
a graduate scheme or something.
I mean, we do a lot of outreach for graduates. The main thing that we try to encourage graduates to do is get a company set up. Now I know that's something that's not necessarily that glamorous or romantic if what we want to do is make games, but we're optimistic that any sort of course that has any sort of business component will point out to people how to do it and what the functionality of having that set up is. It's a requirement for, I mean, in terms of how the legislation is set up, that's not really what Julian and I deal with, but it's a requirement from government that they're not paying money to individuals, they have to pay it to a company because it's a business-related tax relief. So we're trying to encourage people to get that company set up, but then in terms of how that's structured, it can be a little obtuse. I don't know about how to set up graduate programs, but in terms of the cost and the paperwork, seeing it all in a super dense presentation like this makes it seem utterly impossible. But we've had a ton of successful applications from much smaller studios, and the main thing to take away is that Julia and I and the other members of the team, a huge part of our job is getting people through the process. Like we have people call up or send emails when they've opened up the page and just been like, and then it's, you know, what we're paid to do at the BFI is take people through it step by step and get them the certificate that they can then go and apply and hopefully get this money that can maybe enable them to do a day less at work, to focus more on what they're doing in their spare time, something like that. So the low cost and the fact that, you know, we're available, it's not a black box. You don't send the form in and then hear back from us. We'll be in touch like essentially every day that there's a point on it. That's set up to try to make this accessible and available to smaller people, but it is essentially free government money, so there is some paperwork.
One thing I would add is that people, when they see something like cultural test and British certification, they honestly think that means there's going to have to be a red telephone box in there, or Winston Churchill. That isn't the case at all. If your game happens to be set in the UK and you're saying, oh, it's set in this fictional sort of English village, and we think, yeah, that looks pretty much like an English village, that looks like an English house, and we'd be like, yeah, that's fine. If it's set in a completely generic or fancy place, like I said, you can get points for that. It's called undetermined, which I know sounds a bit weird, but that basically encapsulates everything under the fantasy, science fiction, completely generic, because obviously there are a lot of games like that, and we don't want to kind of penalise games that are set in that sort of environment. So yeah, no red telephone boxes unless you actually want them in there.
Yeah, the only games that really can't claim on or can't get points, straightforward points that don't need accountants reports, that don't need anything signed and sworn, are games that are either set
abstract
culture text that is not that.
Yeah. Well, but I mean that's so. This is a game that has received a final certificate.
Yeah, all the games here have received final certification, so there's quite a broad spectrum of stuff. But yeah, something like this, completely abstract, you'd be like, well, it doesn't really have a setting. I mean, did that get points to characters?
I can't remember. It certainly got points to the designer.
Yeah, so something like that, which doesn't have any characters at all or any setting, that can still get points because it can get them elsewhere. It can get them for who's made it, where it's made, creativity, everything like that. So completely different kinds of games. Most games, if it's being made in the UK, and if it's being if the concept is bid by some British or European, then chances are it passes. It's just a matter of how it passes. Obviously, the easiest way is if the game is actually set in the UK, Europe, but it's, yeah.
But yeah, just so if you're wondering about it, if it looks like it might be relevant, we'd encourage you to give us a call or give HMRC a call to figure out if you can work through it easily in a way that makes it worth your while. Are there any other questions about that?
We better limit this to 2 questions, otherwise we're going to overrun. Pizza will go cold. But yeah, so 2 more questions.
Is the tax off the sales of the game itself, or just the company's revenue in general?
So there's 2 ways of claiming it. One of them is if the game is still loss making, you'll get 20% of the losses surrendered to the revenue back. So that's generally while the game's still in development. If the game is out and in profit, then I think it's the point at which you start paying corporation tax is shifted. So you get corporation tax-free profits up to the value of 80% of the development cost.
And it doesn't have to be the cost as a whole. Like, let's say you have, I guess you're making 2 games at once. You have to have rent your office. You have to have stuff.
Yeah. It's so if you are doing multiple. One thing to say is it has to be an application per game. If you're a studio that's making multiple projects, the way HMRC look at it is fair and reasonable apportionment of overheads. Yeah.
So if you're spending equal time on the 2 projects, if you split those studio overheads, other costs between the projects, when you then apply for the cultural test and then ultimately for the claim, then you'll be able to claim on all the money that you're spending on the development. I think there were a couple of questions back here. Are they quick? Can we do both?
Mine's probably quick.
Okay, go first.
So you're saying some of the points were British or European.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little too soon to answer this, but how is the Brexit going to go through?
Okay. It's right now basically it's business as usual. Obviously, it's gonna whatever happens is gonna take a long time. So there's no changes right now. Sort of one thing to say is that everything related to this is from the British government. So, yeah.
In terms of the money that's paid,
yes.
It all comes from the UK Treasury, the UK government. So it's sort of it's there. That's where it's coming from. Some of the structure, some of the test comes from the European Commission, but the money itself is from UK. So we don't know where it's going to go, and at the minute it's business as usual. But yeah, that's all we know now.
And
yes.
If you get a large amount of, if you get a large DLC that's set outside of Europe, does that need to be recertified?
That's a good question. Yes, it basically it depended. You know how I said that if you've got a lot of additional content that you planned on, and you can apply for either an interim or a final, something like that, I would probably say, put a kind of cut on the original game. Or were you going to say that?
Well, essentially, the way it's structured is because the test is ultimately derived from film tests, and it's not immediately applicable to games, so we've tried to broaden it and make it as flexible as possible. So if you're making a game that starts off and on release day, it's 100% set in the UK.
Yeah.
And you get 16 points and you pass, and that's fine. But then 6 months down the line, you release 3 more maps that are set in Chile, and it then splits the setting 50-50. If you got an interim certificate to begin with, you'll then have 50-50 setting. It'll be 2 points for setting instead of 4, and you can maybe make up those points somewhere else. If you went for a final on release, then the new content, because it would affect the result, you'll need to get it certified separately. But what we do is we'll talk to you at the time, and whatever works out better for your finances. If you want to do 2 finals or if you want to do 1 interim, we're not trying to make sure you claim as little money as possible. It's the opposite of that. So the process is open to that, and we can advise on what you're doing. If you keep in touch with us when you decide what you're going to develop, we can advise you on whether to keep a current certificate or do a final and then do a second one.
guys. Can I just ask who's seen some of the stuff I've talked about before? Alright, easy. And how many people are actual programmers versus artists and other people? Alright, too easy. So I'm going to do a bit of a tutorial, so hopefully it appeals to most people. So since there's not many people that have seen what we do before, quick video. Excuse the engine, but yeah, we're kind of cross-platform. What we do is kind of immersive projection theatres. Here's one we took to GDC recently. And it's kind of like the Vive or the Oculus, but you stand in the space. So here you can see our cylinder product. And yeah, it's kind of runs game engines. It was for Unity, VBS, Bohemia's products, and Unreal. And you can see the Xbox controller there, which I'll talk you through today, how we implement that. And what I'm going to do today in the talk is show you some of the underlying technologies we use to implement this. As I guess it's not just used for getting stuff into our environment, but you may have some other uses for it as well, which I'll go through. Alright, so the way that we kind of tend to work is we have this program that I've written, which is called the Igloo Warper. It runs over 5 projectors that project around the space, and it handles all the kind of what's known as edge blending and warping to make sure that the image comes out nice and linear on a curved screen. And so what we need to do is we need to get the image out of Unity or Unreal into the Warper, and then we need to have the two talk to each other. So I'm going to show you through the technologies we use to do that today. So first off, I'm going to show you our camera rig, which we give away to people so that they can integrate it into their games easily. But then I'll go into the technologies we use to make that. So what we have, look here, is a package which we can give you guys and some instructions to use it. The package wraps up 2 technologies. One is OSC, Open Sound Control. Has anyone heard of that? OSC is kind of like the next version of MIDI. It's kind of a nice, easy to use protocol for exchanging information. It's supported by a lot of music environments, a lot of kind of VJ applications, things like Ableton for writing music, and a stack of other stuff. So, alright, it's not going to show you everything because I've already imported it just to kind of speed things up, but you just import our package, and then what you end up with is a demo scene, which I'll show you. Whoops. What have I done? So here we have a demo scene which automatically includes some of the things you might want to use. One is the camera rig, then we have a first person controller which we use to move around, and part of that controller is this little device I have here. It's a kind of really high resolution gyroscope and accelerometer, and it outputs, well, you can get a version that does OSC directly, but we use one that outputs Bluetooth, and then the warper connects to this device and then sends out the orientation via OSC. So it's sending the just the pitch and the roll, the pitch and the yaw, so that when we're in this 360 space, if you have an Xbox controller, typically an Xbox controller, you walk forward. But in a 360 space, the problem with that is if you're looking at the screen in front of you, that's fine. As soon as you turn sideways and you walk forward, you're walking the wrong way. So what the gyroscope allows us to do is to know the orientation that Xbox controller is pointing, so that when you push forward in the Xbox controller, you walk in the direction you're facing. So I've just dragged in a bit of a scene. And unfortunately I don't have the Xbox controller with me today, we can't fly around, but I can show you how that works. So so if we go to the controller, we have some scripts that do all this for you. I'll talk you through them in a second. But what we can do is go and set the rotation input to be the XIMU. So now you can see I'm getting it from this device. And there's a stack of devices out there, hardware devices, that will talk over OSC. So you can get things like temperature, if anyone's seen an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, you can always get them to communicate via OSC. So it's quite easy to build physical prototypes for your devices. And the other thing I'm going to talk you through today is building sort of phone control or tablet control for that sort of stuff. And so what we tend to have to control our spaces is an interface like this, and you can see there's a stack of buttons. And this is a really easy way of creating an interface and sending OSC messages to your Unity environment. And so, quickly show that. So, there's a number of OSC packages out there. Some are paid for assets, some are free. The one we've used with pretty good success is this one, Rug OSC, which is a wrapper around Auto OSC. You can go and get all the source code, look at it yourself, but there is also a simple Unity package. And so it's very easy to install and set up. And what you can do, I've gone and already installed the package already, is I can then go and drop something like a simple cube into the scene. Then what we can do is I've created the script already. Let's go and have a quick look at it. So, very simple script. What we're doing is we're going to create a controller. We're just going to call it Unity Receiver. On the start, what we do is we set up a receiver to receive on a set port 9000. And what we do is then we register a method to receive something from that controller based on an OSC, what's known as an address, and then we have a callback method for that. And so here you can see my callback method. And what I'm doing is I'm going to set the scale of whatever this script is attached to based on an OSC message. So nice simple object, but you can do lots of more complex things with that, which I'll show you in a little bit. So this is the Touch OSC editor. This is how you go and create an interface for your iPhone, your iPad. You can use it on Android as well. And what you can do is you can create a number of controls. It can get quite complex. I'll show you a complex one. Alright, so here we can see a nice complex interface. This is for a music visualization environment that we use. Quick example of that. So this is something you do at Glastonbury every year. We don't just project into cylinders and domes, we do onto the structure as well. And this is a kind of audio reactive Unity environment that we project onto this building. And the audio analysis, it's all done in Ableton. And so the way that Ableton listens to the music and then translates that to Unity is OSC. It's not just transmitting things like the volume peaks, the spectral analysis of the music, that sort of stuff, but things like timelining. So when we want to transition from one effect to another. And all that's done in Ableton, but then sent to Unity over OSC. The other thing we have is an interface to control this environment manually instead of doing it from Ableton. And you can see this interface here. There's lots of different objects that we control. We can change the color of the objects, hue, saturation, value. We can go and do the audio analysis stuff from Ableton. We can do directional lights and things like that. And I'll show you some examples of that in a little bit. But the other thing you can do is just nice simple things. So what we're going to do for the scaling of this cube is we're going to go and create a horizontal fader like the one I have above. Stretch it out. You can go and then set the OSC address to be scale, and then you can click sync. You can label them up and everything. On your iPad, if you're on the same Wi-Fi network, it's quite easy to go choose your layout, add a new layout, enter in your IP, or if you're using a Mac, you'll see it up here. Click OK, and then that interface that you've just created will be on your iPad. And so, done that right, you should have the interface here like so. Alright, so getting back to our simple script, which is just changing the scale. We go and hit play now. Alright, must have changed IPs, 1 second. Alright, so find out the machine, IP of the machine. In the application, you have to go and set the IP port you're pointing to. Just check, we're receiving on port 9000. And then what you can see is, yeah, as I change the scale on the slider, in Unity it moves. So it's a really quick and easy way of creating an interface to something you're doing in Unity. Instead of having to spend lots of time on a GUI, and to have multiple people be able to control that as well. You can create a joint music environment, joint visualization environment, that sort of thing, quickly and easily. And so that's one of the technologies we use, OSC. The other one is a thing called Spout. And so, has anyone heard of Spout before? Spout is kind of open source framework for sharing textures on the GPU. And so you can share something between DirectX and OpenGL, and you can share by pretty much sharing what's known as the GL int, the pointer to that texture, or the DirectX texture. So you can share a texture incredibly efficiently, sort of under 1% overhead for sharing texture. For our Walker, we share textures that are kind of in the range of 9600 by 1080, and we'll share 10 of those on the GPU. When we're doing the Unity stuff, the 360 camera that we use is 5 cameras, and we share those out to the Walker application, and there's little overhead between that. So it's a really quick and easy way of getting a video texture that you're generating in Unity into another application, and then possibly back again. And so I'm going to step you through how you do that. It's a bit harder to set up than OSC, but you can go to GitHub and download the repository Spout for Unity, and it'll come with a demo project and a few other things. There's no Unity package to include it in your own package. You've got to kind of drag all the assets across manually. So I've already done that in this one, and you can see here we have the Spout plugin installed already. And what we're going to do is get scripts. We're going to take a Spout receiver. So we're going to receive something from another signal generation source, and we're going to apply that to our cube. And so what we need, first off, is a new material. As you can see, I've already created one here. we've got our material. Then we need to create a render texture as well if we're going to send stuff out. And so we can take our material and drop it onto our cube, and it's just going to be an unlit texture because we don't want it affected by light. What we can do then is, let's say, so has anyone heard of Resolume before? Resolume is a VJ app. A lot of music gigs you go to, the visuals will be done in something like Resolume. And so it's a quick and easy way of generating visuals, layering multiple layers together, doing special effects, visual effects, glitches, stuff like that over the top. And so what we can do is we can have this video clip playing, we can have another layer over the top, and you can mix things like that. And you can go and choose the way that they're mixed. So fade between them. You can do chroma keying. You can do an immense number of things. So what we can do from this is we can also have our layer here, and we can see we have an effects chain here for this composition. And what I can do is go and grab an effect. I'm going to take a spout sender and add it to this output chain. I'm going to call it Resolume 2. And so now we're sending out this visual that we're seeing at the moment. And if we go back to Unity, what we can do is take a spout receiver and drop it onto our object. And now you can see what I'm generating in this other application comes straight into Unity. And you can do that the other way as well. So it's quite easy to go and let's go and create a camera. And for that camera, we're going to go and use a render texture to render it to an off-screen buffer. Then we're going to take a script and take a spout sender and drop it onto that same camera. We're going to drop on the same render texture that we're rendering so that we're sending out that camera's view. And we're going to call it Unity Sender at the moment. It's fine. Hit play. So you can see in the possible receivers, we've got two that I'm sending out from Resolume and the Unity Sender, which we just created then. And so what we could do is go into Resolume and I think it's this one. I can go and create a new source, and I can do things like grab a webcam and put some effects over it, send that in. I can grab any type of movie. Everyone knows how bad Unity's movie playback is. You could use Resolume to play back your movies. You can see I've got a theater. Does anyone know what a theater is? It's a 360 camera, and so one of the things we've been experimenting with is we can take the 360 camera feed and stream it directly into Resolume, send it out via spout into Unity, and put it on a sphere so that we can stand inside a sphere. And it's a really quick and easy way, in sort of 10 minutes. If you've got something like a Vive or an Oculus, you can be doing live streaming from a 360 video camera into your Vive. So what we have here, I'm going to receive the Unity Sender that we're receiving. And you can see now coming into Resolute is that same Unity feed. So you can bring in a Unity feed, start to do some special effects over the top, send it back to Unity and display it in Unity as a billboard or something like that. And so this sort of technology is incredibly powerful for what you can achieve by sharing or using a game engine to generate visuals for a music environment or a music performance, or vice versa, bringing things like the Theta camera back into Unity. See how this goes. It's an incredibly huge project. Oh, here we go. Here's going to work. So here you can see we've got a 3D model of the stage we're projecting onto. You can see all the objects in here. And alright, so you're not going to see a lot because normally I need Ableton running, and we tend to run it on another machine. I don't have it installed on my laptop. And so most of the environments and the presets we have are all audio responsive. So you saw it very quickly when we flicked it on. If I flick to another preset, you can see some of the stuff that goes on. And so what we can do, just manually, is start to go in, turn on a directional light. We can change the intensity of that light. We can start to move it around. And what else? So you can see the way that we interact with this. It would be impossible in Unity to go and build a GUI for this. It would take forever. This is like such an easy and quick way to go and prototype an environment like this and create something simple to use. And so what we end up doing in Glastonbury, we have 2 or 3 iPads that are there, they have a heap of presets, but people can sit there and play around with the effects and the music as well. But then you also have the audio input from something like Ableton to automate a lot of that as well. One second, I just have to switch to a different OS. So just while that's happening, does anyone have any questions about OSC, Spout? Yeah?
Just a second for one, because I'm curious. How do you get such a high performance in sharing the textures, basically a grab from a camera? Something else? Is it like a graphical memory share?
It's all kept on the GPU when you're using Spout. So nothing comes back to the CPU. All you're really sharing is the texture pointer. And so each application can pretty much draw that texture natively. There is some locking between the textures and the applications, but it's amazing how much you can do. We share, up to 30 HD textures on the GPU, and we see maybe 10 frames a second.
What's the lowest API, like DirectX 11, OpenGL 4.0?
DirectX 9 works fine, or DirectX 9 EX. And the other thing that's really powerful, which I haven't shown you guys, is you can get a sender that sends Spout over the internet. And so you can go and have a laptop generating a Unity, you can send that to another machine and view stuff. So something we're doing at the moment, we're creating kind of virtual viewer for our domes and our cylinders. and that's going to be a Unity environment that we can put onto a phone. But we don't want to have a huge app with heaps of preview movies or having the Unity environments that we do. So what we have is in our warper, it sends out the warp texture via spout over the LAN. And if you've got a phone, it's receiving that spout texture on the phone, and you can have our domes, you can flip through the different dome options, and you can see different movies playing. You can drag and drop the movies on your laptop. You can run any of your Unity environments if you've got our camera in there, and you can see it on the headset straight away. And so it's incredibly powerful for, I guess, sharing stuff between apps, be it different, like a Unity to Unity or Unity to some other environment. Any other questions for OSC? Yeah, cool. So I'm incredibly unprepared. I had a baby 3 weeks ago, but I'm getting no sleep at all. So I did plan to prepare a talk, but I'm actually going to be incredibly cheeky and show my talk from my Unreal talk the other day. But all the content, oh well, no, some of the content is actually Unity. And so this is the stuff we took to GDC. Alright, so yeah, here's some of the domes we do. The dome on the bottom left and the cylinder. We do up to a 21-meter dome. You can see things like the Battlefield 3 launch we did in the middle right there. The tracked floor as you walked along the floor, you walked in the game environment. You can see the Army using some of our products. We were lucky we had the Queen in the other day for some military stuff. Yeah, we were all very surprised as well. She dug it.
Battlefield 3 thing from the Gadget Show.
Sorry?
Is that from the Gadget Show?
Yeah, the Gadget Show, yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, it was our best marketing thing ever by a long way. You can see the top center is a product called XVR. It's a kind of Unity-based training environment for training first responders, firemen, that sort of stuff. I won't show you the serial. Has everyone seen the Battlefield stuff we did?
Yeah.
Alright,
Show it again.
Do it!
I find the guy's voice so annoying though.
On tonight's show, you're going to see what I truly believe is one of the most innovative and just plain out there builds we've ever done on the Gadget Show.
It's quite long, I'll skip ahead.
Thank you. Now, I detected my body's outline. I was free to pick up my wireless gun and begin the mission.
So Battlefield only supported 3 inputs, so we were capturing it and we would move those around the space based on person's head rotation. Tracked gun.
It felt like I was actually in the game.
That is insanely realistic. This is so good.
But then the enemy spotted me.
Paintball guns with rubber pellets. If you got shot in the game, you got shot in the environment.
Oh, right, that's my ear. Jesus, this is so scary. It's coming to go down. What's going on?
The tracking on my gun was out, and wasn't aiming where I wanted, leaving me a sitting duck.
I
had no option but to pull Jason out of the firing line. So that is...
So you get the picture. That was 4 years ago, and that was Battlefield. They would support, and I needed to slate that point 3 screens wide. But these days, with things like Unreal and Unity, you've got access to the engine, and so it's really easy to actually get complete surround. And then do things like we've done a form of asteroids. We had 10 iPads in the room in a circle around, and we were flying through space, and each of the iPads controlled a little cannon, and you got to shoot out your little section and create a nice multiplayer experience. This is the spout I was talking about before, and you can see a lot of the things that support it. Processing, if anyone's familiar with that, they normally teach it in first year computing in a lot of universities. You can get your processing environments out through Spout and into Unity or vice versa. A lot of media servers for doing kind of concepts, effects. Disney use a lot of this sort of stuff. Creative coding environments, etc. Here is what happens when you have the little gyroscope I was showing you before attached to the Xbox controller. And you can see that as I turn the Xbox controller, it's nice, natural interaction. Alright, so this is what we took to GDC recently. Again, we're kind of not games developers. What we're doing is creating an environment and a kind of platform for other people. So we give the camera rig away to anyone that's interested. And what we're hoping to do in about a month or two is have a kind of weekend hackathon where we've got some pizza, beers, and some prizes. And we'll give you guys the camera rig, and if you want to come and spend some time in our office, you're welcome to kind of drop the camera rig in any of your environments and just see what it works, or see what it's like in 360. What you can see here is, I don't know if anyone's seen the Nightmares content. We took the, I can't remember the name of the gun. It's a nice gun with a bit of recoil on it. We have an optical tracking system there that tracks where the gun is oriented and where it moves as well. And you can see that everyone is wearing glasses. It's actually in stereoscopics as well. So what we're doing is sending out 10 cameras from Unity in 360 to create a stereoscopic view, 5 for each eye. But the type of other thing you could do, maybe you're using a Vive or an Oculus and you want to have something like Sony do, where you have a kind of a lounge room view. You can attach a spout camera to your player, and so instead of sending out the Oculus view and the kind of distorted eyes, you can send out a normal camera view to another window that sits on a big plasma screen next to your game. And so that's the type of thing this stuff's being used for. And not specifically Unity, but you guys might be interested. We've just got an Unreal Tournament working. And so it's, tracked gun, and you've got a little thumbstick on the gun to run around, and full 360 3D Unreal Tournament. Cool, that's it.